see you actually did make some slides, so let me go see if I can get Meet Echo to switch over to that. Hang on. Yes, I did want to share the screen. I think it's that one. Yeah, it is.
Okay, these are my slides to try and make this a timely and productive meeting. Before we get there, is anyone going to volunteer to please to take some notes for us? Before we have to call out some names, it'd be good for someone to jump in.
This is not an onerous task. What we mostly need is to capture key points of discussion and follow-up. We do not need, Joe said this, David said that, Gory responded thus and such.
Okay, it looks as though we do have a volunteer.
Who's the volunteer?
Tom Jones in the chat.
Thanks, Tom. Right, okay, let's go then. This is the note well. Right, David, take the next slide, please.
Okay, hang on. Busy putting the chat. Busy putting the chat somewhere where I can look at it without causing yet more problems. Let's see. You probably wanted this one.
I did. This is my explanation of what's going on with the SCTP drafts, which have been in working group last call. There's two of these, 4960BIS and NatSub. 4960BIS completed the working group last call with review comments. I invited somebody to take another fresh look at this because we're aiming at proposed standard with the hope of elevating this after we publish the RFC. And we're waiting for a revised ID after this IETF, where we're going to discuss a couple of the topics that came up in that review. There might be a confirming working group last call on the latest revision. That's also true of the NatSub work, and both of these we will hopefully conclude at the current meeting. Next slide. Agenda review, we're going to have 4960BIS first. Michael Tuxton's going to talk to this and we'll tidy up the discussion. Magnus Westerland's going to talk about the SCTP DTLS draft, and we're going to revisit NAT alternatives for SCTP briefly and maybe follow up later on that one if needed.
And there's a prize for SCTP, folks, if you can get through what was budget for 20 minutes in 10.
Well, whatever. If you can get them published as well, that'd be good. Right. Section 6 is about transport protocols. Anna's going to try and deliver 2 talks in 5 minutes just to prove that weirder things can happen. The second one's going to cover one side of measurements on NQB, and then Greg's going to talk about NQB. Joe Touch is going to talk about UDP options, except I'm going to talk about it instead of Joe. UDP options is one of the targets for a future interim. So we likely will not be able to clear all the issues with UDP options now. We'll simply take that to an interim in early September. And then we're going to do our best.
Item 6.3 is a status update only.
Yeah, that's true. Marcus is going to present multipath DCCP. This has been the slide decks of TSVWG for many meetings. It's here because it's been requested to be adopted as a work item, and we're going to discuss around that topic. We are not going to start the adoption call now, but we're going to talk about the coming possibility of an adoption call, and we would love input on that. Next slide. We have just 1 hour. If we need it, we will take the topics to an interim. For instance, the remaining SCTP issues, UDP options, etc. And there are IPR concerns that have been talked about on the list concerning the multipath DCCP draft. We believe these will be resolved, and we will not start the adoption call until the IPR is really clear. So this is just a discussion of whether that type of work is good here, or whether that draft is a suitable basis for that work. The adoption call will come later, just to be really clear on this. Next slide. I think it might be my last.
I think it's over to 4960 bis.
Good. And new speaker, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, this is about RFC 4960 bis, which is the base specification of SCTP. Next slide. That's the history. So the gray ones were done before the last IETF, so they are just here for giving the complete information. Next slide. You see that there have been 3 revisions based on comments during the last call. One was pretty easy, the definition of control chunk. Then Timo reported something about association MTU or association path MTU wasn't very clear, so we introduced a new term for that. And Magnus provided a review.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, Magnus provided a review with a couple of issues, and all of them have been addressed except for one. Next slide. And here's what the changes were. Basically, you see it's clarifications on various things like SSN generation, TSN generation, what's a CUM TSN AG, clarifications on fragmentation of user messages. Some of this stuff is going back to if you have read Quick documents, you might want to emphasize the differences between Quick and SCTP. It was also added or changed a text that avoids sending an error message or an abort chunk, a message with an abort chunk with verification tag 0, which shouldn't be the case. And we are allowing the L factor for ABC not to be 1. Based on the TCP/EM discussion, this is I think that's a good thing. And a reference was added to DTLS over SCTP. What has not been accepted is Magnus brought up a point that SCTP is supporting multi-homing, and each endpoint has a list of the addresses of the peer. And for these remote addresses, it has counters for errors, it has a congestion window and all this stuff. And so this is only per destination address. Magnus suggested that this should be based on a pair of source address and destination address. Basically, this was a very early decision in the design process only to look up, only to consider the remote address. So this is not an issue or a mistake or something like that. That's something you can change, but we don't consider it a change within the base spec. So Randall Stewart and myself think that this would be a different flavor of SCTP. Magnus can say something about that. So I didn't accept that at that point. Next slide. So what changes are upcoming? 2 minor things. One is relax the constraint on L. Right now it must not be larger than 2. Yeah, but the discussion was basically this is not up to date anymore, so I'm planning to remove that. And based on the discussion with Magnus, there will be added text that whenever the SCTP stack gets notified that a route to a particular destination has changed, it resets its parameters. That's completely valid. We have already text there if we change the diffserv code point, so this is very easy. That will come but I think the open point is, or might be, the one Magnus brought up.
Yeah.
From the perspective
Michael?
of the authors, we would be ready for working group last call after that.
Okay.
Yep.
Michael Gorey, remind me, I believe we were intending to advance 4960 BIS to the next rung on the standards track?
Yep.
In which case,
60 and not an extension.
Right, exactly. And the response to Magnus's request for extension is, in Randy Bush's immortal words, send draft.
Yeah. I'd like to give Magnus just a chance to
Sure.
talk about it, and maybe also to figure out how many people might be interested in such a draft if it were to be written. Magnus?
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, yes, I'm fine with this. I understand the desire to keep this and going to full standard here, etc. And yes, I think the really core of my issue about the paths when resetting congestion control state and all those things is being addressed is sufficient at this point. And yes, I understand that there's maybe want to update SSTP for being fully path aware rather than just destination aware. But that's I understand it's propose an extension in a separate draft. So, but yes, I'm interested to see if there's more interested in that. So, thank you.
I think that would be an interesting question to call out at another IETF meeting. So, Magnus, think about preparing some slides to make that as a proposal or write a draft, and then let's see if there's appetite for that later. Jonathan, are you in the queue for SCTP BIS?
Yes, I just wanted to say that when I'm looking, I've quickly read over the draft, and right now the only changes from 4960 is just referencing 8540, but there have been more changes than that. So I think it would be helpful if the draft had a full list of what's changed since 4960, including the changes that are post 8540.
We have a complete RFC for the majority of the changes.
For the majority,
Yeah,
yeah, but there's some that. Yeah, but I guess there's some that are. I mean, if you want to say for most of them, I mean, just reading over your comments today, you've had changes since then also. So, I feel like it would be helpful to list what's changed over and above the 8540 changes. That's all.
But not including clarifications.
Yeah, just I mean,
okay.
I mean, other than just a bullet point, clarifications, but
yeah, just the protocol changes. Even this last one from Magnus on resetting the congestion control variables, it would be good just to call it maybe in an annex or something.
Yeah, that's all. Just
I think that's a really useful contribution, and I think if you add that, I would be willing to start a working group last call on the updated version of this document to confirm all those changes. And if anyone else wishes to contribute a review of this at that stage, that will be fine. So we can take questions during working group last call. Please make the addition that Jonathan said and the proposals you just change and submit a new ID.
Okay.
Good. Next item, please.
Magnus, I think this is you.
I hope you can both see and hear me now. So yes, I want to talk about details over SCTP work. We're up to 01 version here. My co-authors is listed there: Michael, Taxon, Claudio, and John. So let's move on to the next slide. So this update was quite substantial. One of the biggest changes is that we actually moved to using the adaptation layer indication to understand that you're trying to do details over SCTP here, and have that signaled and negotiated in the initial init response there. We clarified a couple of things about replay protection, failure cases. We also included some socket API extension for SCTP auth related to, so you can understand if following this about which algorithms being used, etc. So we can actually understand that you arrived at the one which we're requiring for DTLS SSTP. but that's an extension. So, and we have a mechanism now based on how you track the key changes between, and it's receiver dropping the old DTLS key after one full epoch after. So when you're going to key n+1, you're dropping key n-1, so to say. And that's the trigger. However, in general, one of the biggest problems we have here is around DTLS 1.3, which is not giving us feature parity. One of the biggest issues is that it removed renegotiation, which means that we have no perfect forward secrecy rekeying and no server re-authentication. So, and in the current version, we have a serious limitation. We have any limitations both in length with DTLS. It's probably not serious because it's several years of normal usage, but it's that you actually only have 16 bits of key epoch. It's if you're rekeying every hour, it's basically 7 years, which is probably fine for you in session length. But it's but we're also not fulfilling some of the DTLS requires of dropping old keys. As I said, we're keeping it 1 epoch, so we may be keeping a key for an hour extra, things like that, if you're rekeying on a timed schedule. And we have a hard time of actually ensuring this. And if you go to the next slide, we will dig slightly more into this issue and trying to understand what we actually have. So we have 2 significant issues. One is DTLS 1.3 with the semi-permanent sessions, as I brought up. And one of these reasons is beyond the 2 I've already mentioned, the first ones. We also have the TLS exporter secret, which is not updated when you rekey in DTLS 1.3 as it looks now. And so it's tough with these long-lived sessions that we, for example, the FDPP needs for its usage. And we are actually very uncertain if we can get any DTLS 1.3 extensions in the future to actually address this. And for example, 3DPP, you have some of the users there have significant cost if you're trying to restart your SSP association. So it's not ideal there. You also have the other issue is knowing when the old key is no longer needed. And I'm trying to illustrate it with a figure up below, because currently, as we have the DTLS record key and the SSP auth key is tied, and therefore, if you start using, then you rekey, and then you send a new user message, you see that you might still receive large user messages for the first key long after that you started using the second key. So it's not a hard cutover as the current mechanism, and that's why we have this 1 key epoch limitation and why we need to keep the key around and things like that. And receiver tracking of this is, to be fully certain, is hard. It's basically impossible because there could be some message on the way that you haven't received. So we have limitations here, and potentially we could have impact on application. We don't think they exist in application, but we really would be good to hear about if someone has some usage where they have large user message and long-lived and maybe want to adopt DTLS. That would be a problem here, because currently 1 user message might as long as live for 1 key epoch, and that's give us a limitation in time and space, etc., for how long it will be. So, so if someone has anything, please speak up. But otherwise, let's move on to the next slide where we talk a little bit what we think we're going to do here. So, DTLS 1.3. We have been thinking about if we could go another direction, it would be a larger update, but it's actually create new DTLS connections for each time you need to rekey and seamlessly switch over to them. The DTLS and DTLS records has a DTLS connection ID field that you can tell it to use, so that's fine. You still need to deal with a few other things about, it should say issue 2 there on connection level, a bug there, but you still need to know when you complete the rekeying. And another alternative could be towards the extensions, but we don't think that's ready. So either we try to find something that works, or one other potential solution would be to actually just do an update for supporting DTLS 1.2 now and make a lot more long-term work on 1.3 to meet the deadlines we have. But we are going to give a try of trying to meet some of these before giving up. But and on the rekeying is completed, we have several different cases and things here, and we're trying to see what different trade-offs are. I mean, the current SSB auth key is either accepted limitations, and it's probably fine for most applications or any of the old applications we know about. We could do HTTP API changes for SSB auth to be able to change it, because that's one thing, but that hampers, of course, the deployment and how much code changes needed to deploy the new DTLS SSB edition. We could also actually change how we map user messages to HTTP. So we could take the DTLS and protect the user message and actually split it over multiple HTTP user message. And that way we could actually change over the authentication key when we desire in the middle of the upper layer user message. Or add another signal for explicit message. But yeah, so we have a couple of ideas we're trying to evaluate and think about, but we basically realized the week before the deadline here that we have these quite significant issues still and want to look forward. So next slide. We will basically continue work on solutions. We will target having some proposals here about how we go forward with this and trying to deal with them in the time frame of September. We appreciate any input, but we do want to avoid significant delay. We are very aware of the desire here for 3GPP to have a solution within reasonable timeframes so that they can adopt this and address those issues with large message. So,
Magnus, let me check something. Yeah. I think I heard you say. What I think I heard you say is that 3GPP will be satisfied with a DTLS 1.2 solution that meets their time frame and is likely prepared to wait for us to figure out how to solve this problem for DTLS 1.3. Is that correct?
To my understanding, and John is more active in 3GPP and providing contributions towards the security fair, but basically 3GPP is currently accepting and continue to use DTLS 1.2. That's the recommendation. I mean, basically an accepted security solutions for them from their perspective. So it could be one way forward here. And if others that's active also in 3GPP or cross, etc., we're willing to discuss. But it is one potential solution here. But we want to see if we can actually come up with something in September you think works, and submit that or give it to the working group to see. So,
do you think you'll have a draft ready for a September interim with the 1.3 proposal?
At least the later part of September, I think we can do it. I mean, there's some us authors going to have some vacation here during August, so vacation. I think we can. Yeah, I think we should expect to be able to. I mean, if we're going to have something reasonable and evaluate it, I think we can do that in a few weeks. I hope at least we can do that and come to some conclusion. Okay,
that's interesting. Please have a look at Magnus's slide again if you're interested in this topic, and please discuss this on the list, because this is one that we'd like to continue the momentum and get a result by our deadline.
Okay, and Martin, in your role as Exalted AD, would you please ensure the security area is aware of this potential mismatch between SCTP and DTLS 1.3?
Yes.
We are. I will add to that. We have been discussing. We actually been discussing. We are getting some late changes into DTLS 1.3 to address some of these about key epoch field length and things like that. It's probably to change, but these larger things is not going to be addressed. I think.
Yeah, I happen to have to look at the DTLS RFC at the RFC editor, and it looks like it's going to pop out sometime in August, and it sounds like this would involve quite a bit of work if we hauled it back, and I would not like to be responsible for doing that.
No, there's some smaller tweaks that it looks like the authors and the security AD responsible for DTLS 1.3 is already aware, and so it's most likely going to look like an authors 48 change to the document for a few things. Yeah.
Okay, let's take the SCTP NAT update.
Okay, so we have a document for a long time, and there have been 2 reviews from ADs, Magnus as a former AD, Martin as a current AD, and Claudio. And some of these comments were, I would say, in the range of what's expected in a working group last call. We have some clarifications, some corrections, some additions, and so on, and it matches what Magnus said at the last meeting. So it's like he's expecting a new draft to address these. There is one point which is outside this area, which was brought up by Claudio, definitely, and Magnus. And the point is that we have constraints in doing that for SCTP, and we all agree on that. We can change the addresses, but not the port numbers. And for multi-homing, you need some special procedure for iterative setup of the multi-homing stuff, and that's also agreed on. The basic question is, when you're doing that, how do you handle a local port number collision? So two endpoints behind the net with the same local port number want to talk to a server, to the same server. You have to do something. If you do NAPT, you just change the port number. Next slide. So the working group document goes back for years, and the idea there was to use the port numbers and the verification tag as an association identifier or connection identifier, and therefore be able to handle port number collisions if not also the verification tag collides. And this gives you a 64-bit of randomness, which gives you a pretty good chance of avoiding this. And but this requires that the endpoints do the association lookup also based on the association identification also on the verification tag. So this is a substantial change of the endpoint. Code-wise, it's not that complex, but from a conceptual point of view, it is. So Claudio brought up that why don't we do just normal NAT, never change, don't change anything, don't use the verification tag. Just in case you have a port number collision, let the endpoint change the local port number and retry or time it out. And that's a completely different thing. Hard to integrate, so that's why this document hasn't progressed. I need to say that the original focus of the NAT document was NATs at home somewhere doing this. Claudio is more focusing on NATs coming into the game when you do container stuff and deploy SCTP there. So that's why it didn't progress further. Any input?
Any questions from the group?
Any questions for the group? How to deal with this? So it's not as simple as integrate things, because I don't think it helps in always saying, okay, you can do option A here or option B or A and B, and then the implementer has to choose. That doesn't make sense.
Well, in essence, if you do option B, residential NATs don't work because they're all NAPTs.
Not for SCTP, they can't change. Well, you can do NAPT as long as you don't do multi-homing.
Right. I think what we need to do here is think a little bit more. Maybe discuss a little bit on the list. One option might be to continue with the document through the publication chain. This is not something new that we've discovered. We knew this all the time. We just didn't have a use case for the other way of working. So we could publish this, and I think we might want to toss that through the working group. We could also think about the other one. I don't think we have time to discuss those now, and I'm going to call a little bit of a go back on the list and talk a bit more about this. Let's publish the SCTP base spec, and then let's move rapidly on this. So I'm not suggesting it's a long pause, but maybe a little bit of time to do some reflection.
Fine with me.
Okay, let's do that. Again, maybe a September interim. We should have this resolved, if not before. And if the proponents of the other method would like to write an internet draft, that would really help clarify the details. Only a little bit has to go in that draft, but it'd be nice just to have on paper what exactly it looks like.
Yeah, it sounds like
Claudia
a major
has done some of this work. So
Yeah.
I think there does exist a document on a GitHub repo.
Yeah, but not an internet draft. So, okay, let's move on. Thanks, Michael, for that update, and we'll be hearing more about that very shortly. On to Anna on the newly adopted work item on DSCP.
Hi, everyone. So, hi, I'm Anna. I work with Gori. I'm here today to just give you a quick update on RID, titled Considerations for Assigning a New Recommended DSCP. So this draft has just been adopted at the beginning of this week by the working group. It got name change. So I'd just like to thank the working group for the adoption, first of all, and for all the feedback that we got so far, and say we're very excited to progress this. So just a quick reminder, in case you're not familiar with the draft, this draft exists because there has been an interest within the working group on new DSCP assignments. But there are several dynamics and pathologies on internet paths that are at play that need to be taken into account when choosing a new DSCP. So for example, some routers operate on former toss semantics, and this can lead to packets being remarked to unexpected code points, and this can have all sorts of side effects, undesirable side effects like priority inversions. Or you can end up with a lot of traffic remarked to the same unexpected code point that leads to traffic being aggregated in weird ways, and so on. We know these pathologies exist, and we know what their prevalence in the internet is because we've been conducting measurements, several measurements over a number of years. But the main aim of the working group for this draft is to provide considerations for new DSCP assignments. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, we've adopted the 0.0 version of this draft this week, but we would like some input from the working group, particularly on mappings between DSCPs and various lower layers. So if you're interested and you want to have a read and you have some input on any of these, then please let us know. We'd be very happy to hear from you, and let's make version 0.1 happen. Next slide, please. Yes. So here's the point where I briefly pause for questions before introducing the next talk, which is Greg's talk on the NQB, PHP, and DSCP. So any questions so far?
Just a comment, you probably know that you're going to wind up doing the 802.11 mapping twice. Once for the RFC that says how it's supposed to work, and once for the running code that Greg is busy fighting about how all the deployed APs actually work.
Great. That just seems we need two people to help contribute things to the draft. And seriously,
Greg needs to use both sides of his brain.
Yeah, I think Anna's call for input here is really sincere. This isn't something that anybody can write up apart from the people who are involved with these specs. So if you're involved with the specs or operating the networks, please come forward. Martin.
I don't know if Dave was being serious, but like, is it actually in scope to like write down how it's supposed to work, or is the purpose of this document just to document what's happening in the real world?
We can write that down, but if I put my working group chair hat on, I'll say this is about how DSCPs work. So, and it's not a new recommendation for new things. It's how are these registries being used. So another draft could change that behavior, but I think this has to document what is actually used in the wild against, and include perhaps what the IETF expects to be used in the wild, even if that's not really used by everyone.
Yeah. Martin, what is
wonderful? Okay, yeah, that kind of is my intent.
Yeah, Martin, what I was referring to is that there's two versions of what effectively running code for 802.11. There's what the APs have been doing for many years, and then there's a new RFC that says here's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Onward.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Anna. You can talk to that.
Don't know if I clashed with someone. Yes, thanks everyone for the input. It would be very good to know what I can look for in measurements, in terms of measurements, when we do the next round. But yes, we can take this to the mailing list. And I can now move forward to talk a bit about the data that we have for the NQP DSCP. Right. So the initial proposed pair of code points for NQB were 42 and 2, but we presented some measurement data last IETF that showed that actually code point 2 was not necessarily the best choice because it did appear quite a lot on several paths in the internet as a result of toss bleaching of some other more well-known code points like AF11 and AF21. So what we did is we examined another pair of code points that fit Greg's initial criteria, and these are 45 and 5. And the advantage is there are no well-known code points that will result in DSCP5 when they are bleached. But the concern with the code point 5 was that it used to be in a pool used for experimental assignments. Next slide, please. So we actually ran some measurements to check the viability of code points 45 and 5. And we have good news all around. We found no weird breakage that results from using these code points. We found that in terms of remarking, it's not different at all from the previously proposed code points 42 and 2. And we only found 2 paths that remark to DSCP5 in the wild. And one of them is a weird Department of Defense network. But the main key takeaway here is that we have no concerns about the new pair of code points, and I'm very happy to just let Greg take it over from here. Just a note, there's another slide after this one about how we conducted the measurements and what the methodology was. Feel free to examine that and get in touch with me if you have more questions on the measurements.
We'll take Bob's question. Greg's slides.
Bob. Bob, you've got your hand up. Would you like to talk?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
right.
Go ahead.
We can.
I actually joined the queue before the NQB bit, just to so this is relevant to that. I wondered, once the IETF has published RFC saying what, as David said, what the IETF thinks ought to happen, and then this is publishing what is happening. In the process of publishing this, might that confuse people into them now thinking the IETF is saying what is happening should happen? You see what I mean? In other words, how are we going to introduce this document, and are we going to say it's okay whatever is happening, or is there any sort of caveat at the top of this needed? I'm not sure who the question is aimed at. Probably not Anna, but chairs maybe.
Yeah, as a chair, I think we will. I'm so pleased this has been made a work item. We will have to do work to figure out what this is. It could even become BCP at some point if we have very concrete recommendations on the code point allocation and usage. But this is not so much about documenting weirdisms. It's about documenting how to use DSCPs, and to get there, we'll have to go through this process you've just outlined. And yes, this does not endorse strange practices, but it might have to highlight some and say something about them.
Okay. NQB, and we are a little bit behind schedule. Greg?
Yeah, I'm taking this from Greg's time because we're talking about his draft. So you've probably got 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll be quick. Next slide. All right, the status of the draft. I talked about draft version 5 at the last IETF. Since then, there have been 2 published updates, one a couple of weeks ago and one just last night. The main changes in draft 06 were to adopt the 45 and 5 pair of code points instead of 42 and 2, based on what you just heard from Anna and discussion with others as well. And then I got a very detailed review by 3 individuals, Stuart, Bob, and David, and endeavored to address most, if not all, of their comments in draft 06. And then draft 07 then includes further changes. Bob posted another set of comments to the mailing list shortly after 06 was published. 07 now includes edits to address those comments, including restructuring the text in the draft. So he pointed out that the flow of the material could be improved upon, and so I agreed with that, and I changed the order, which unfortunately makes the diff a bit hard between 6 and 7. So I sent a post to the mailing list about that, and you can see a little bit more information if you're interested via the GitHub repo. So in addition to reordering the sections, a new paragraph on 3GPP networks was provided by Kevin Smith from Vodafone. So I put that into the new draft. And then wrapped up my work on addressing David Black's comments. So I'm sure, David, you haven't had a chance to look at those yet, but hopefully in due time, you'll take a look and see if you think I addressed those correctly. Milestone currently is to submit proposed RFC, pro-standard RFC by end of September. That's coming up quick. Significant changes. So DSCP change. Section 4.1, this is actually an important one. In all of the previous drafts, I had resisted putting any kind of numbers in the draft in terms of, a sender can mark its traffic as NQB if it's below such and such a megabits per second data rate. There had been questions in the past as to, well, how does an application know whether it is below the available capacity in the path? Like I said, I'd resisted putting anything specific in the draft on that, but I'm, I guess, bending to the pressure now. And the next slide has the detail on that, and we won't have time to go have a discussion on it, but we can take a look at it. A few other significant changes. Added a note that just marking your traffic NQB doesn't let you off the hook. You still need to implement some kind of a congestion response. Reorganize the Wi-Fi section to make it clear that Wi-Fi gear can fully support the PHP. The focus had been more on the interoperability with existing equipment, so I made that organized better. And then one of the shoulds changed to a must. I won't go into the detail on that. So next slide. So this is what I have currently in the draft on sender rate requirements. Effectively, it says a application that sends no more than a few well-spaced RTT, well-spaced packets per RTT would be a candidate, and then it equates that to no more than about 1 megabit per second in today's network, but it does indicate there's no precise bound. And the requirement statement that is linked to that text is that if the application's traffic exceeds a few packets per RTT or exceeds approximately 1 megabit per second, it should not mark its traffic. And the remaining comment from Bob on the mailing list today on that was, boy, that seems like that could get old fast in the RFC, and should we provide, or could we provide more guidance on how that evolves in the future? So I think I'll have to take that to the mailing list. Next slide. Other open questions. First question, are we okay to request early allocation of these DSCPs from IANA? Any objection to asking?
Let's check that on the mailing list, and then if assuming that there's no objection there, we should do that.
Okay. And then the second bullet, the draft does include a requirement for RFC 8325 gear. It's a should. Basically, it says 8325 gear should map the NQB code point to the video access category, and that's in the case that the equipment doesn't fully support the PHP. So there's one case where you're implementing 8325 and NQB, and I think that's fine. That's not necessarily an update of 8325, but this one is in the case where you're not implementing NQB, the full PHP, and there's a recommendation on that. So it seems like perhaps we should list 8325 as being updated by this document. Okay, and then the last bullet, just thoughts on working group last call. There have been a number of changes, including yesterday. So I'm not seeking working group last call today on this, but I think we're getting awfully close. I'd like, particularly the folks who provided a recent set of comments, to double check they're happy with what I did to address those comments, and then hopefully we can go to working group last call in a couple of weeks from now. Would be my goal.
Okay. We're right at 15 minutes. Gori, would it be okay to jump straight to multipath DCCP and treat UDP options as a status update that folks can read at their leisure?
I'd like to do the UDP options thing in 2 minutes.
Alrighty, I just hit the button. Let's see how okay, the clock starts now.
Okay, literally starts now. Wait a second while I start. I'm not Joe Touch. I am Gori. Joe isn't at the meeting. We plan to have an interim, and we will ensure that Joe is present, which might allow a bit of discourse between him and people like Tom Herbert, who have been discussing the issues on the list. We've had a lot of discussions around MSS and a lot of discussion about other things, most of which have been clarified. Next slide. 13 contains lots of updates. The AE split has been made, and this is a change. Next slide. The frag format is something that's really important to look at, and this is something that's been the major topic of discussion. This will have to be gone through in detail when we have the interim meeting to confirm how this operates. This is the key thing to look at. Next slide. This is Joe's list of pending issues, which should align roughly with what I said. Again, Joe's willing to discuss these on list, and of course, we expect at least one revision of the document before the interim meeting. Thank you. Right, I'm only starting in 1 minute.
Nicely done.
Is there anyone who wants to comment on Joe's draft or needs to ask something at the mic now? Please go ahead as we prepare for MPTCP.
Whoops.
No. Okay, we will take that up at an interim. Marcus,
hang on a minute, something misfired on me.
Yeah, this is a presentation by Marcus. At the end of the presentation, we'll be asking for people who've read this document using our poll tool, and we'll be asking for those who are interested in developing a work item around the topic of multipath DCCP. These calls will be made at the end of this particular talk. Go ahead.
Thanks, Gori. Thanks, Gori. This is Marcus from Deutsche Telekom. I hope you can hear me well. Yeah, I want to talk about multipath DCCP and also look together with you towards working group adoption. So, having first a look into a potential multipath DCCP deployment, as you can see it in the figure at the bottom, when the MP-DCCP is deployed as a proxy in a core network, potentially a 5G core network or in a cloud infrastructure, along with MP-DCCP implementation in a residential gateway, in a smartphone. And if this is even enhanced with some encapsulation scheme, then this is able to carry any traffic, and it offers a lightweight steering, switching, and splitting multipath support. For example, hybrid access, where it is able to carry any type of traffic, regardless if it is a TCP or UDP, or it could be implemented for the 5G 80SSS, which is specified in 3GPP as of release 16, where MP-TCP is specified to support TCP traffic, and with MP-DCCP there's the opportunity to enhance this beyond TCP traffic, and with when this becomes complemented, the MP-DCCP to the MP-TCP, then any kind of traffic could be covered. We felt that there's a high interest in such scenarios. Recently, there was a liaison request from GSMA to Tsvwg on MPDCSP working group adoption. Also, back in time, there was a liaison request from Tsvwg to IETF requesting support for non-TCP multipath transport for the ATSS use case. And in general, there seems to be a strong interest from operators and vendors who communicated and expressed their interest on the Tsvwg mailing list. That handovers me to the next slide. Yeah, multiple institutions individually sent their interest to the Tsvwg mailing list and or expressed it as a part of the formal liaison request from GSMA. On the right side, you see the logos of all the supporters who were engaged here. Beside that, we also worked on many other things. So we published in the meantime an open source Linux reference implementation, which is available at multipassdccp.org, which provides the basic MPDCCP, but also with a flexible modular scheduling and reordering scheme. We developed this along with the MPDCCP draft, which is now available in version 5 and provides some significant updates. For example, for the handshake mechanism, it fills a lot of empty sections and many more things you also find in the backup slides of this presentation. There was also some discussion on the mailing list about the implementations and testbeds which are available. So City University of London and British Telecom announced some testbed activities. There is a testbed in Sweden with Karlstad University. That's also quite interesting because it's not just using the Linux reference implementation. They have also developed MPDCCP in the user space. And last but not least, we have testbed installations at Deutsche Telekom for multiple scenarios, for campus activities, for towards ATSS and also hybrid access, also some more detailed information you find in the backup of this presentation. Yesterday, there was a note on the mailing list about the existing IPR disclosure. So that one has been updated on Monday and declares a lost relation to the MPDCSP draft after a European Patent Office review process. Unfortunately, it's not published. It's at the Secretariat, which is probably busy due to ongoing IETF. So I hope within the next day that will be published. Yeah, moreover, we also published 2 papers at ANRW 21. That was part of the Monday session where we presented results of the MPDCCP testbeds. Also, some individuals offered already that they would support in reviewing the drafts. You find the names here at the bottom of the slide. Yeah, coming now to the last slide, to the conclusion. We believe that we are now mature enough to go for adoption. That's why we want to request it here. If this would be conducted in a timely manner, that would also open the room to provide MPDCCP as a solution into the started Tsvwg release 18 discussion on ATSS. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy now to receive your feedback and also the guidance from the Tsvwg chairs.
Okay, maybe we will definitely take a comments if we have time, but I'd like to first of all start a poll. Can you please use the tool to note whether you have read this ID or a recent version of the multipath DCCP ID? After we complete this, we will ask for interest in adopting a work item. So hold this open for just a couple more minutes. One more minute.
That's well over the threshold. At least 15 people have read the draft. That's unusually good for drafts we're asked to adopt. It's going to be 20. It'll be 20 if you kept it open. All right, start the next one.
Okay, the next one is interest. I can't talk and type. Okay, this one. So this is a call for votes for raising your hand if you see interest in starting a Tsvg work item on multipath DCCP. This is not an adoption call, but it's asking for interest in the work item, and I see 29 people. I'll leave this one open just a little bit longer because it's important input for our adoption process. Okay, 32 respondents, of which 25 raised their hands saying they have interest. David, do we want to do another call related specifically to this draft, or do we wish to wait for the IPR disclosure process to complete?
I think it's our responsibility to wait for and encourage the IPR disclosure process to complete so that those responding to the adoption call have the complete and correct IPR information as opposed to taking our various words for it.
And I would concur on that. So please consider we have enough information to start an adoption call on the list when things are clear, and we'd like to use the remaining 4 minutes to take any questions you might have on this particular presentation. Does anybody have questions for Marcus on the MPDCP work and the direction it might go?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Does anybody in the working group have questions for you, Marcus, on this draft and the direction it might take?
If there's no question from the audience, I have a question to you, the chairs. So which time it usually takes to get then the adoption?
Okay, an adoption call is always made on the IETF mailing list. So normally it would take a sense of the room to get some clarity about whether that adoption call was felt by the people in the room. We've done the basic test there, and we can note that there was strong support for work in this area. So the adoption call will be for adopting this particular draft, and we will start that on the working group mailing list as soon as we have the information from the Secretariat relating to the IPR.
You should have an adoption. You should have an adoption result. I would think sometime in September. Jonathan, go ahead.
I'm just noting there's a comment in chat about quick multipath. Maybe there is time to clarify what the relationship between quick multipath and DCCP multipath.
Yes, for sure, I can spend some words on that. So for the deployment options I have shown in the first slide, I think there is no relation. Quick could be a protocol which is carried then over MPDCCP in a hybrid access scenario or in an ATSS scenario. The only relation I see that MP quick combined with datacron extension combined with mask could provide a similar deployment as we propose it with MPDCCP, but we think it's much more complex and much more heavy.
And going to take a lot
MPDCCP, yeah, probably, yeah. That is really what pushes us. So our goal is to bring this into 3GPP and hopefully get the gap fixed there in the release 18 timeframe.
Okay, I will note that the chairs have coordinated with the quick working group chairs, and they are aware that we were intending to talk about this draft as a work item here. And I see our AD in the queue, but offline. So how can you be the queue but offline? Go ahead, Martin.
Thanks. Yeah, just to maybe for the information of the community. So we've approached Quick a number of times about maybe taking up a multipath work item, and I think it's a fair summary that they're not interested at this time. One thing I'm excited about is that this, I think, I think there are generic multipath problems that are protocol independent regarding scheduling and so on, that are research questions at this point. And I'm excited that we will have a good platform between NPTCP and NPDCCP to explore those experimental questions, and then one day come back to this working group or maybe a special group to actually standardize whatever the outcome of that research is.
Thanks, Martin. Mira, you're in the queue. Go ahead.
I just would like to clarify the state in Tsvwg on what ATSSS is doing. So for release 18, there was people were much in favor of using a quick-based solution, but because MP Quick wasn't available at the time, this was delayed until release 18 now. So kind of the discussion starts over again, but so far I have not seen a proposal for using MPDCCP, and so far I've sensed a lot of support for using some kind of quick-based solution. So I don't think there's like a strong dependency here from Tsvwg at the moment.
Yeah, Mirja, just to give some words here, you're absolutely right, but I think that is because there's no alternative so far, which is seen by Tsvwg, and with a potential working group adoption of the MPDCCP, there is an alternative which can be used, and then it's depending for sure on the supporter, on people or companies who support this proposal. Then sure, but the room is open in release 18, I think, for alternatives.
I want to quickly +1 Martin's comments in chat. Marcus, thank you for your patience and perseverance in getting the draft to this point. It has not been a direct journey from start to where you are now.
Yeah, thanks also for your support. It was a great journey.
Corey, your audio's not coming through for some reason. You might want to turn your mic on. There we go.
Marcus as well, say thank you for bringing this here, and we'll be carrying this story on the mailing list. I was also going to say that there are a number of things that will be brought up on the mailing list, and you need to keep your eyes out. We have adoption call, we have some working group last calls, and we will have some important decisions to make. So please keep your eye on the mailing list. It's been lovely to be with you. Even better if we were there in reality, and hopefully that will happen soon. In the meantime, though, we will continue virtually with a virtual interim, likely in September, at a time when the various contributors can make, and hopefully other people will be able to attend remotely at our interim. Anything else to say, David or Wes?
Thank you all very much. The adventure continues.
Of course.